the battle between the two world champions Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand at the Tata Steel Chess India Rapid. d4 by Magnus, and Vishy goes knight to f6, c4 on the board, e6. Will Magnus allow the Nimzo Indian? Yes, he does. He goes knight to c3, and Anand instantly pins the knight. Bishop b4, knight to f3, an invitation to transpose into Ragozin, and Vishy takes it. He plays d5, and we are now in Ragozin territory. cd, ed. Magnus takes a bit of time and puts his bishop on g5. This is the main line theory. A question is asked to the bishop. Would you like to take on f6 or go back to h4? Both are viable in the position. Magnus goes back to h4. And Anand castles here. Magnus plays e3, wanting to develop his bishop to d3. Standard way in which you play, and Vishy goes bishop f5. The main move here is queen to b3, but Magnus here plays the relatively unknown knight d2. This is not theory, and therefore you see Vishy settling down in his chair, trying to look in the distance to recollect his theory, and he plays the most ambitious move, g5, bishop g3, and c5. As you can see, knight d2 was not developing a piece, moved the same piece in the opening twice, and Vishy has struck in the center. Now a3 played. A very good move here would have been bishop a5, but Vishy takes on c3, b takes c3, and c4. That's his plan. White is not going to get e4 easily, and he has fixed the c3 weakness. But Magnus says, Vishy, your king is weak now. I'm going to open it. He puts his pawn on h4. And now Anand has to decide whether he wants to keep the h-file open. He decides to keep it closed with g4. Bishop e2 would have been a good move here, but instead h5 played. Is this a bit too slow? Is white too undeveloped here? Magnus playing too ambitiously here. Knight bd7. Vishy completes his development. Bishop f4, attacking the h6 pawn. Now, the most natural move here would be king h7 to defend it, but instead Anand goes for the counter-attacking move, queen a5. Queen c1 played, defending the pawn. Will Vishy now defend the h6 pawn? Not really. He's not interested. He's now threatening to go to a4 and put more pressure on c3. Magnus says, I'm taking your pawn. Why not? Let's just take the pawn on h6. Knight a4. What a game. Vishy does not care about his rook on f8. Also, he's going after the c3 pawn. He says that in this position, my main advantage is my bishop on f5, knight on a4, queen on a5. Magnus takes the rook. And now Anand has to decide, should he take it with his king or the rook? He takes with his rook so that the king can at some point hide on the h7 square. What an interesting position. f3 by Magnus, not only trying for e4 at some point, but also making a square for his king on f2. Vishy has to decide how to continue. He can actually take the pawn here, knight takes c3, or even start off with b5. Black has excellent compensation here. In fact, black might even be slightly better. But Anand plays rook e8, which is not the best move in the position because it allows Magnus to tuck his king away safely to f2. Rook e8 is an active move, but not in the spirit of the position. That was not the move. b5 played by Vishy, and here it seems like he's missed a tactical shot of Magnus. Look at that. Magnus knows that he has something and he plays e4. Now the queen on c1 is breathing. It can look at the g5 square. It sees that it has an opportunity to go there. D takes e4 played here. And now the best move is knight takes e4. But instead Magnus goes for knight takes c4. It's too tempting to bring your queen to g5. Vishy's queen is attacked. He has to take on c4. And now the queen jumps in to g5. Here, Anand clearly understands he has a choice between king h7 and king f8. You can see he's trying to take his time. King f8 is the right move because after queen takes f6, the f7 pawn is protected. But instead, he goes king h7. And this is going to haunt Vishy now because queen takes f6 happens. And the problem is, in the other position, if your king was here, you could have gone rook e6 and made your king safe on e7, but now you can't do it. f7 is hanging. So Vishy plays the intermediate move e3. The pawn is not as dangerous, although it can go to e2 at some point. Magnus takes his time, goes to g1, king to g1, and now Anand had to waste a tempo to defend bishop e6, but Vishy feels that he has counterplay by taking on c3. So d5 played by Magnus. This is kind of a slightly nervous move. He wants to defend the c3 pawn. If bishop d5, he has queen f5 check in the position. So Vishy is actually thinking with what to take this pawn, bishop takes or queen takes. He finally decides to take with the queen, but the downside to this is that now his c3 pawn is defended here by the white queen. So rook e1 played by Magnus. Queen d2, Vishy not leaving the c3 pawn there. Rook e2 played. If you take on c3 now, then queen takes c3, knight takes c3, rook e3, and white should be better. So Vishy keeps queen on c1. Magnus brings his queen back. He's attacking the e3 pawn now. Look at how white pieces are boxed in on h1 and g1 and f1. Anand plays g takes f3, trying to open up the g file for his rook. And a very good move by Magnus. Queen takes e3. Excellently spotted. Vishy takes on c3 now with his queen. And g takes f3 is what Magnus wants to do. This is still quite a complicated position, but now the king has a nice square on f2. So Magnus is now an exchange up. Although there are very few pawns left on the board, this should be winning for white. King f2, keeping his king safe. Vishy has 4 minutes, so does Magnus. Queen to g7. The idea is to threaten a mate in one with queen g3. Check here on e4. If king h8, then queen e5 exchanges the queens. So he goes king h6 in the position. And now queen f4 check. King h7. And the queen comes to e5. Excellent move. Now there's no queen g3 check. The queen is defending that square. Queen to h6 played by Vishy. And you can see Magnus knows he's very close to the win. He calculates it in his head. Rook g1 offering a rook trade. Of course, all the exchanges are going to favor white here because he's ahead in material. So Vishy keeps the rook on the board. But this turns into a tactical mistake. Can you spot it? How Magnus can win? Queen e4 check first. King h8. Look at how Magnus frees up his rook on the e file. King h7 and in comes the blow. Rook takes e6. If queen takes e6, there is queen g7 mate. If f e6, queen d7 loses the rook. Magnus wins. Vishy resigns. What a complicated game. The expression on the face says it all. They now analyze a few lines. It was an extremely complicated game. Really bold play by both the players. But in the end, it was Magnus who came out on top.